Deep inside the Iya Valley on the island of Shikoku lies a typical farming village called Nagoro, also known as the Valley of Dolls. Here in this remote mountainous village in western Japan, dolls outnumber humans 10 to 1. 270 dolls to be exact, compared to only 27 residents.
そういう実際に住んでて今亡くなられた人とか自分が気に留まった人がおったりしてそういう人形も作ったりしています。
From a once thriving village of 300 people, Nagoro today has less than 30 people. One day, the community may just cease to exist as the old start to wither away. Nagoro's plight also reflects a deeper problem facing Japan today: a rapidly aging society.
There's not enough young working population that can fill in the workforce. And there's a big burden on the economy as the population is aging.
So 1 in 3 persons in Japan is age 65 or more. Is Japan living on borrowed time? What will happen if the government does not reverse the trend of the world's fastest graying population? Can the world's third largest economy overcome the problems of decreasing birth rates and a rapidly aging society? Can Japan reinvent the wheel yet again and be a force to be reckoned with? Silence greets visitors to Nagoro, a small mountainous village in western Japan. Not a living soul can be seen walking along the deserted streets. Only creepy, life-size dolls are seen dotting the landscape. The dolls are the creations of one of Nagoro's few remaining residents. "69-year-old Tsukimi Ayano. She started to create the dolls to help cure her loneliness and sense of despair each time she returns home. Most residents of this tiny village have left a long time ago in search of employment or have died. Her intention is to inject some life back into the village.
人が全然少ない。自分が子供の時にねここ出ていた時と全然ここに住んでる人の人数が少なくなっていました。そうですね。これもう昔はもうね賑やかだったですけどまあ寂しいはね昔から比べたら寂しい感じがしましたね。全部がそうではないですけどそういう実際に住んでて今亡くなられた人とかそういう人形を作ったりしています。全部が全部はそうではありません。
Here at this village, you can't even hear children's laughter. That's because there are no more children. The last school closed down in 2012. The youngest person living is 55 years old.
そうよね。もう自分も69歳にもなりますので高齢化になってきてこの田舎だけじゃなくって町の方もそうですけどだんだん人口がね少なくなってきていうのは感じますけど、あまり難しく深刻に考えんようにしております。
The problem facing the people of this village is also being replicated in many parts of the country. It's a symptom of a much bigger problem facing Japan today: a shrinking population, low birth rate, and high life expectancy. These problems have been described by the government as a national crisis. If not resolved, it will affect the ability of Japan to grow and achieve its economic ambitions.
Well, after the World War II, Japan still had a high fertility, higher than 2.0, so which means higher than replacement level. So at that time, government of Japan tried to decrease it. So kind of to decrease the population growth, to stop the population growth. But after 1980s, our fertility went down rapidly. In 1 year, it's lower than 1.2. So at that moment, government launched many policy measures to raise fertility, but there's not still a substantial effect of those policies. So that is a biggest headache for government.
Japan's growth has suffered a severe setback during the war period. Millions of people lost their lives. 600 million industrial facilities were destroyed, and 8.5 million people were made homeless. Its economy was in tatters, brought to its knees by the war. But Japan rose quickly from the ashes of World War II to become a global economic powerhouse. In fact, the post-war rise of Japan is one of the most dramatic cases of rapid economic development in modern history.
I think there was a sentiment of destruction in the 1940s after the war, that a lot of things were destroyed, and because of that, the people were very committed to rebuild the country, to catch up again, to make the industry grow again in Japan.
日本の経済は1955年から71年ぐらい、71、2年ぐらいまで、年平均10% ぐらいの高度成長を続けました。これが日本の経済力を大きく高めた非常に大きな要因です。
It's believed that Japan's phenomenal growth would not have been possible without its people. The dramatic increase in the number of people born after the post-war period had helped Japan greatly in its economic reconstruction efforts. 8 million babies were born between 1947 to 1949 alone. They're known as the baby boomers generation.
日本の人口は戦後直後にベビーブームの世代が非常に多く生まれています。私もその一人です。で、これが大きな人口の塊になっているわけですけども、これがだんだん上に上がってきて人口ピラミッドの中の働く人になる。これは人口で15歳から64歳がワーキングポピュレーションということになっているんですけども、そうすると、ある時期はですね、この働く人の割合が非常に大きくなる。で、これがちょうど高度成長に一致しています。
69-year-old Tsukimi Ayano was born in Nagoro. Her family moved to Osaka when she was a teenager in search of better economic prospects. This was in the 60s, when Japan's economy was still riding high. But the country's economic recovery started to lose momentum in the late 1980s.
大阪では鉄工所みたいな会社をしてましたけど、やっぱいい時もあればね、悪い時もあったりすることはありましたけど、私も勤めに行ったりはあまりしたことないんで、家の仕事をね手伝ったりしてたんで、今はだんだんとこの村にも帰ってきて、土木の仕事もね、もう昔はたくさんありましたけど、今はだんだんなくなって、ここの辺にも何軒かあった会社も倒産したりして、あとここ2軒ぐらいしかないので。
After the economic bubble burst spectacularly in the late 80s, deflation started to set in, and growth began to decelerate. Government debt, on the other hand, soared to 250% of GDP.
バブルがあったということですよね。で、バブルの時代というのは80年代の後半なんですけども、株の値段とか土地の値段が3倍ぐらいになった。で、これが経済を非常に活性化させたわけですが、これはバブルだったわけですから、必ず弾ける。で、弾けると経済を大きく押し下げる要因になる。
And a lot of that was driven by speculation, both from investors within Japan and investors globally. They're over-investing in the Japanese economy because the yen was appreciating at the time. So the central bank in Japan lowered the interest rate to a very low level, and that sort of spurred even higher investment into the Japanese economy. And these overinvestment created a bubble, especially in the housing sector and the construction sector in Japan. And the bubble eventually bursted in the late 80s.
71-year-old Hajime Nagoro certainly believes that life back then was much better. After the economic bubble burst, he feels Japan has never recovered since.
弾ける前から比べたらな、いろいろ変わったと思うけどな、景気はそんなに逆に下がったんじゃないん、不景気になったんじゃないん。バブルが弾ける前までと比べたらな、全然こう差が出てきたわ、いろんなもんに。例えば遊びの回数も減るしよ。なあ、ゴルフの回数も減るだろう。だからみんながなんつうんだよ、真面目になったわ、逆のバブルが弾けて。
That feeling is justified, and actually it's a feature of a bubble, right? Because when the economy is in a bubble, the biggest feature of a bubble is that people are overconfident about the future, about the future economy, and that's why they're overinvesting. So confidence is very low in Japan right now, and I guess people are feeling that in the everyday life.
Compounding the drastic economic downturn was Japan's economic transition. Growth began to stagnate. The two factors dealt a deadly blow to Japan's economic recovery.
I think it's been going on for a while. There's no sudden change that triggered this population crisis or demographic crisis. If you look at the population in Japan, it's been falling since about 10 years ago, that it's no longer growing.
Mention Japan, and the image of a cool, vibrant and energetic country comes to mind. Cities like Tokyo that don't sleep, 24 million tourists a year, urban landscapes that psychedelic, high-speed bullet trains. But once you step out into rural Japan, that's when the crisis of a population decline hits you squarely. The latest data from Japan's Internal Affairs Ministry reveals that the Japanese population has fallen for 10 years in a row. As of 2019, Japan has 125 million people. The decline of 0.35% is also the fastest ever fall. To paint a stark picture, in 2017, Japan had 900,000 babies born. But that year, 1.3 million people died, which means that Japan's population was negative 400,000. In other words, there were more dead people than babies born. Can a country literally die out? Acute labor shortage has posed numerous challenges for Japan for some time now. There are just too many jobs, but too few workers. Last year, there were 161 jobs for every 100 job seekers on average. It's the highest ratio since 1973, highlighting manpower woes in the world's third largest economy and its aging society. And that has put a drag on the nation's growth, which has stalled since the early 1990s. One way to resolve the issue is to open the doors to foreign workers. While the move is seen as a little too drastic, especially for a country that has always been averse to immigration, it has been left with no other options.
The government knows that this poses an economic challenge for Japan because the workforce has been shrinking, and that's been a problem for economic growth because they just don't have enough workers to fill the jobs that they have. As part of the solution, the Abe government has been proposing a more friendly immigration policy, which is allowing immigrant workers to stay in Japan for a bit longer than they used to be.
In April 2019, the program accepted some 40,000 workers from overseas in 14 fields which are facing acute labor shortages, including nursing care, food service, IT, agriculture, and construction.
So I think now there's a new policy that allows some workers in certain industries to stay in Japan for as long as 5 years.
Traditionally, Japan has always been known as an insular and a culturally homogeneous country. Until today, it has not fully embraced the idea of a large-scale immigration.
日本が島国で一国一民族一言語なので、大体日本語しか喋れない人が大半を占めていますし、その日本の労働環境というとやっぱりその長時間労働っていうものがある程度その是とされている部分っていうのがやっぱり外国人の皆さんにもですね結構伝わってまして、日本市場自体があまりその人気が出ないと言われるのがもともと言われているところです。
これは、私はやっぱり日本は労働については相当クローズドな国だと思います。でだんだん外国人の働く人は増えてはいるんですけども、日本人と同じような条件で同じように受け入れるっていうことにはなかなかなっていないというのが大きな問題で、なかなか正面から向き合ってこなかった。例えば研修ということで研修に来るんだったら来てもいいですよっていうことで来てもらって、しかし実際は安い労働力として使っているということとか、真正面から受け入れてこなかった。でこれを今度政府が相当変えようとしてるんですけども、ですからこれからは徐々にそこは正式な働き手として受け入れていくということになると思いますが。
32-year-old Nitin Chowdhury is an Indian national from Pune. He's working as an IT engineer with a large Japanese company. He came to Japan in 2016 to look for fresh opportunities not available back in his home country. He's also hoping to learn more about Japan's rich indigenous culture. But trying to fit into the Japanese work culture has proven to be quite challenging for him and his family. The Japanese generally do not speak English, and Nitin doesn't have a choice but to pick up the language to survive in his new working environment.
Coming to Japan is difficult, bit difficult. At initial phases it was difficult. Unless you have what we can say bilingual capability, coming and settling in Japan is difficult. Maybe 3 months is will take time to get adjusted in this environment. Yeah, it's not long, but from like the person with family, probably the family members will be finding it difficult for maybe 6 months or a year.
On the work front, Nitin has only praise for his Japanese colleagues. He said they made it a point to be inclusive and are proactively making improvements to make foreigners feel welcome.
They have started communicating day-to-day basis in English. Meetings are happening in English. So in my organization also, like they're encouraging for the native Japanese people to learn English, to attend some Japanese English courses, get certification. Like one of my manager, he went for Philippines also. For a month he went there and learned English. So that way it is shifting now. In the workplace, probably they'll explain how we are doing, how the way of Japanese working is, what we need to do, what is expectation. So that comfort, like they'll provide us a lot of explanation, they'll give us a time. Yes, they are welcoming.
The reality is, Japan has always been proud of the homogeneous nature of its society. cultural pluralism and racial diversity has never been its hallmark. Nitin, however, feels that it's not accurate to suggest that the Japanese are isolationist by nature.
So it's not that they are isolating themselves. There are people who are shy. They are shy. They are not able to speak with you, but they want to speak with you. We have to understand that. It's not that they are conservative. It's not that they want their thing first. It's not like that. It's only the thing that shyness is there. Because of that, they are not getting opened up. So other person should not think that it's a kind of racism or something different.
Bringing in foreign labor may be a desperate move in the right direction for Japan, given the circumstances. Experts, however, believe that it may not be enough to mitigate the phenomenon of a dwindling workforce in the country. Although the Japanese government plans to accept around 340,000 foreigners over the next few years, experts say that won't be enough to counter Japan's declining population, which dropped by 373,000 in 2017 alone.
There's still some downsides. For example, it's very difficult for them to become a permanent residence. It's very difficult for these immigrants to bring their family to Japan, which means that most of them may not stay for a very long term, that as soon as they've learned the trade, they work for a few years, they have to go back to their own country, right? So I think in some ways his policy is improving the existing situation, that they're bringing in more foreign workers to fill in the workforce in Japan, but it's not addressing the root cause of the population problem, that more could be done than what they are already doing.
Still, some believe that the government under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has made a good move in trying to address the country's labor crunch.
2025年にですね、約介護職員で42万人ぐらい少なくなるというふうに言われているんですけれども、おそらく外国人で補えて1割から2割、もしくはよくて3割ぐらいというふうに言われていますので、ただ当然それを方たちを我々としては当然入ってきていただいて、一つの労働力として仕事をしていただいて、母国に技術を持って帰っていただくということの支援はですね、早々に開始をさせていただいているといったところです。
当然なやっぱり労働力が少ないんだけど、外国のな労働者の人をどんどんな許す限りはやっぱり日本のあれじゃないか、介護とかよ医療とかいろんな建設もあるしな。だって日本に労働力ないのにな、当然な外人の人来てもらってな、俺は日本のあれでは仕事をしてもらうことではたちまち日もさちもいかんじゃろう。そういう罪が来とるけんな、法律ができたんだけんな。
別に否定的ではないですけど、別にね仕事に別に来られてもいいんじゃないですか。日本の人手がないって言うのにね、助けてもらったらいいんじゃないかと思いますけど。
Prime Minister Abe, however, has another trump card to boost Japan's dismal labor market, to bring more women back into the workforce.
これで労働力不足が深刻な問題にならないためには、今まで働いていなかった人が働くようになる。それの大きな源泉は女性なので、女性に与える。
But is it easier said than done?
There's a lot of social constraints and political constraints as to how much power women could be given, especially in countries like Japan.
Japan is one of the world's most developed and technologically advanced countries. With a GDP of some $4.9 trillion, it's also the world's third largest economy. But when it comes to gender equality, it seems to lag behind many other developed nations. It remains very much a male-dominated society that clings to traditional values. The belief that husbands should be breadwinners remains deep-rooted. Compared to men, women also largely stay on the margins of business and politics. According to the World Economic Forum Global Index, Japan has fared the lowest among G7 industrialized nations in terms of gender equality. The index also places Japan at 110th position out of 149 countries.
There's a big social stigma to women who work too much, to women who make too much money, to women who don't have children or don't have time to take care of their children.
まさにおっしゃる通りです。私自身は母が仕事をしてましたので、当時は非常に56年前ですけれども非常に珍しいもう0歳児から保育園に預けられて6ヶ月の時に預けられてだからものすごい当時はもう世間からもう鬼母のように言われたわけですよね。で私の母は東北の出身なんですけど田舎ではそういう集まりの時に親戚が集まると女性だけが働かされて、男はずっと酒飲んでくだらない話ばっかりしてるわけですよね。
But when push comes to shove, the country has no choice but to force through a change in the country's traditional values. In a traditionally male-dominated society, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe made history in 2013 when he announced his strategy of womenomics to enable more women in the labor force. Now, estimates show that if Japan can close the gender gap in the labor force, GDP can increase by 15%. So, can women save the Japanese economy? Mr. Abe's policy has succeeded in adding more than 1.5 million Japanese women into the labor force since he launched the policy in 2013.
Women's labor force participation rate has been rising in Japan, and right now it's even higher than in the US. So we're seeing some progress that women are more likely to work compared to before.
But up against a deeply ingrained culture of discrimination against women in the workforce, is Prime Minister Abe's strategy of women empowerment and womenomics doomed to fail in the long run? 37-year-old Tomoe Uchiyama quit her job after her son was born 7 years ago. Like many of her peers who gave up their careers after giving birth, Tomoe is thinking about working again. But she's not optimistic about climbing the corporate ladder, given the inherently strong gender bias at the workplace.
どう考えても男性の方がちょっとできなくて女性の方が優秀でもランクというかは差がついているし、女性例えばパンフレットの補充だとかそういうようなサポート的な業務は全部女性にって上司が割り当ててしまっていると思います。
So these other inequality issues are still not being addressed in Japan, and that's preventing women from being fully as productive as women could be in the labor force.
At home, Tomoe is also trying to change the culture which is deeply ingrained in their society. The issue of gender equality, for example, is a popular topic she talks about with her husband. She's hoping he can set a good example for their son by sharing responsibilities equally between the two of them.
息子にはジェンダーだけじゃなくて全てのことに対して差別的でない平等な考えを持つようになってほしいと思っていたのに、もうすでにこれはお母さんがするものとかそういう考えがもうしっかりあって、男はこう女はこうという発言がとても多くてショックを受けています。でやっぱりお父さんが休日ダラダラしてるからだと普段の生活を見られているんだぞと、座っていてもお母さんがコーヒーを出すみたいなのを片付けるのはお母さん、全部するのはお母さんっていうのを見ている結果だぞって思って私は夫に強く言いたいんですけれどもあまり言えずにいます。その息子が結婚するときにお嫁さんに迷惑かけたくないと。
Women politicians account for just 10% of Japan's lower house, According to a report by Inter-Parliamentary Union, Japan ranks 164 out of 190 countries in female political representation. Even Saudi Arabia ranked 59 places higher than Japan. Are Mr. Abe's words about empowering women just lip service?
多くの人が安倍さんを信じてないのは、安倍さんが率いている自民党の候補者が一番女性の比率が少ないんですよね。そんなことも簡単に増やせるはずなのに、それ自分の周りから変えてないっていうところが、彼が女性から信頼されてない。
Oriza Hirata is an award-winning Japanese playwright, theatre director, and academic. He says for real change to happen, the motivation has to be more than economic reasons. There has to be a mindset revolution. Otherwise, Mr. Abe's reforms are doomed to fail.
そこが深刻な問題です。地方が一番変わらなきゃいけないところです。まだまだ男尊女卑の風土は地方の方が強いですからね。安倍さんの改革が進まないのも、女性を経済的な理由だけで使おうとしているというふうに多くの女性が感じているからです。やっぱりそのマインドの方が大事だと思っているので、その精神の方を変えていかない限り、経済的な理由だけで社会が変わるってことはないと信じています。
That's partly the reason why Japan is going big on robotic technology, to help deal with the country's acute labor shortage. The government has plans to quadruple the size of the robotics industry by encouraging automation in everything, from rubber factories to elderly care. In most other economies, robots are seen as a threat to jobs and livelihoods. Not so in Japan.
日本の企業で大変面白いのは、例えば自分と一緒にロボットが働くとすると、このロボットに名前をつけるんですよ。それで友達みたいにして接する。だからあまり敵だとは思わないんですよね。工場が例えばもう閉鎖するというような時には、みんなでお別れの会をする、機械と別れる会をするってことは、機械を非常にシンパシーを感じて、むしろホスタイルではない感覚が非常に強い。日本で非常にロボットが発達する、日本はロボットが発達する国なんですけども、これはだからそういうロボットに抵抗感がないからだと言われています。
Takeshi Miyamoto runs an elderly care home in Tokyo. Home care services for the elderly are in high demand due to the aging demographics. But the industry is under immense pressure from the lack of manpower.
そもそもは少子高齢化に伴って介護職だけに限らず、特にサービス産業を中心として労働力っていうのは全体的に不足をしています。でそれに伴って高齢化っていう意味においては、高齢者産業に入ってくる介護職員っていうのは年々増えているんですけれども、需要の方がどんどん伸びていってしまっていると。そういったことによってその需要と供給量がバランスしないので、どんどん不足していっているというような形になっているというのがまず一つですね。
One thing they're trying is using robotics and AI as caretakers or as nursing care providers to see if we can replace certain workers with AI technology.
Natsuki Yonemura is a senior nurse in an elderly care home. She acknowledges that her field involves a lot of hard work. That's the reason why she strongly supports the use of robotics and artificial intelligence to address the issue of manpower shortage.
それを取り入れることによって、今までかかっていた時間が効率よくなりましたので、その分人が、同じ人数であれば、時間ができるようになりますので、新しいサービスを取り入れることもできますし、この最低限の人員の中で、今までとサービスの質を変えずに運営するっていうことが可能になりました。
で今はつけなくても非接触で取れるので、 例えばベッドのそのマットレスの下にセンサーがついていたりとか、天井にセンサーがついていたりとか、そういったところから、結構いろいろなそのバイタル情報っていうのは取れますし、今までそれっていうのは人がわざわざ見に行って定点的に観測してたんですけど、そういった業務はもちろん人がやらなくてよくなってますけれども、ただ当然何かあれば人が駆けつけるわけですから、そこを補填するというか、人のワークフローを限りなく軽くするというような形でロボットたちが活躍しています。
Japan is in the midst of its fourth industrial revolution, an age where artificial intelligence or AI and robotics are powering growth, transforming economies and societies. While the rapid growth of robotics and AI has caused fear in many societies, Japan proves to be an exception. The problem is, in Japan, such a robotic revolution and automation have not progressed fast enough to compensate for the fast declining workforce. Despite growing skepticism over the government's efforts to resolve the country's labor crunch and falling birth rates, it's not all gloom and doom for the Japanese economy. I met with one mayor whose city's population growth has surpassed the national average.
Growing. Probably in terms of rate, the fastest growing city in Japan.
How is he able to get families to have more babies? Find out after the break. Japan is facing an existential crisis. Its population is shrinking at an alarming rate. In 2016, Japan recorded less than 1 million new births for the first time in its history. Last year, the birth rates fell again to a record low. According to Japan's Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, the country had some 900,000 births last year, down by 30,000 births compared to 2017. The total birth rates fell below 1 million for the third straight year. Is it a ticking time bomb for Japan's economy?
日本の出生率は私が生まれた時は 4.5 私が生まれた時の出生率 4.5 なんですよ。一人の女性が平均 4.5 人子供をそれはどんどん下がっていって今 1.43 とか 1.44 ぐらいまで下がってきています。
In 1 year, it's lower than 1.2. So at that moment, government launched many policy measures to raise fertility, but there's not still a substantial effect of those policies. So that is a biggest headache for government.
Numerous reform measures have been put into place to try and boost the country's birth rates, including offering free early childhood education. Yet, birth rates continue to slide.
結婚する人が減るとダイレクトに子どもの数は必ず減ります。結婚の数が減ると結婚しない人が増えると子どもの数が減る。もう一つは結婚した後生まれる子どもの数が減るということも考えられる。この2つしかないんですけども、どちらが大きな原因かっていうと圧倒的に結婚しなくなったことが大きな原因です。
35-year-old Akihito Kondo works as a school administrator. The soft-spoken bachelor ticked all the right boxes of an ideal husband. He's well-educated, holds a steady job, and has his own apartment. According to the population census, Akihito is considered single. However, the internet celebrity says he's already married, or so it seems. In 2018, he married Hatsune Miku. Miku is not an ordinary girl. She's a pop star hologram, a character that exists in the virtual world. In other words, she's not a real person. Akihito's reason for not marrying a real woman is that he was very unpopular in school back then and was often bullied by the girls. Hurt and frustrated, he lost all interest in girls. That's when he met Miku in the virtual world. He fell in love with her and decided to marry her instead.
家族はいい反応はしてくれませんでした。母は祝えないというふうに言われましたし、妹からも祝えないというふうに言われました。もう父は他界してるんでそっちの反応は分かりませんけど、はい、あとは友達に関してはこれ人によりますね。オタク友達は割と受け入れてくれたんですけども、そうじゃない友達でもでも同世代の友達は大体受け入れてくれた感じが多いですね。
It's not easy to understand how someone can fall in love with a fictional character who does not exist in real life. Akihito, for one, feels happy living together with his virtual wife because he does not have to deal with problems that exist in the real world.
その後ゲームとかアニメとかずっと見続けていて、アニメとかゲームのキャラクターに恋愛感情を持つっていうことをずっとしてきて、徐々にこうなんていうんですか、二次元と現実の女性との重要度がだんだん変わっていったんですけども、やっぱり女性に対してトラウマができてしまったので、私にとってはもう落ち込んでいる時に初音ミクの動画見たりイラスト見たりっていうので救われたんですよ。だから私にとっては初音ミクっていうのは好きな女性であって私を救ってくれた存在なんです。
Akihito's experience, as unusual as it appears, is indicative of a growing problem facing Japan today. If couples don't get married, no babies will be born. Last year, the number of marriages fell to a post-war low of 580,000, down by some 20,500 from the previous year. Even Japanese experts believe there's nothing the government can do to encourage more singles to get married and have children.
結婚する人が減ってるんですね。いわゆる未婚の急増ですよね。こちらがその子供が減っていることの理由なんですよね。で、そうするとじゃあ人々にですね、あなた結婚しなさいということを言っていいかどうかですね。そんなものは個人の選択ですよね。したがっていわゆるなんていうか出生率とか子供の数とかそういうことに政府が政策として関与すべきでないと私は思いますね。
だってこれ選択ですよね、それぞれの個人の。はい、ですのでそれは個人の選択を尊重するっていう立場ですので、はい、無理に結婚させて子供を産ませようっていう考えは私にはありません。
Yoshiharu Izaki is the mayor of Nagarayama City, some 15 miles from Tokyo. As a public servant, he's committed to making national policy succeed. Helping to boost the nation's fertility rates is certainly one of them. Nagarayama City has bucked the trend, becoming one of a few cities in Japan that has a significant growth in its population. Between 2010 and 2014, Nagarayama's population grew by 1.16%. In contrast, Japan's overall average population growth was negative 0.7% over the same period.
Growing. Probably in terms of rate, the fastest growing city in Japan.
What is the mayor's secret formula which the rest of the country doesn't seem to have? His first strategy is providing an innovative solution to young families' childcare needs. With proper support, the mayor feels that women will be more open to the idea of having more children. He set up a nursery transit service very near to the main train station. This way, parents can safely drop off their kids in the morning. The transit service will make the necessary arrangements to bring the kids to their respective schools, and the parents would then go to work directly from the train station.
So those parents bring children to that station, and then from that station we take bus to transit children to each nursery. And then in the evening, vice versa, they bring back to transit station. And that saves tremendous hour in daily basis. Well, that was probably first implementation of the service in Tokyo metropolitan area. So many people are kind of astonished.
Secondly, to help women continue with their careers after having children. The mayor wants to bring work, usually done in Tokyo, to Nagareyama City and turn it into a new satellite town. That way, it could cut down on traveling time to and from Tokyo, giving more time for parents to attend to the needs of their children.
We try to put working place bring from Tokyo to Nagareyama City. Nagareyama City can provide the space with low cost. And then we provide it. Then there are many companies contracted and then hired Nagareyama citizens who used to work as a professional. So right now, more than 100 people work there. And then they work as a professional, so they can keep up their career. And then, and also they work near children, so that something happens, they can go to nursery or home, and then come back to the satellite office and keep finishing work.
Addressing the demographic crisis will remain a constant challenge for Japan. And as Japan's economy stumbles, its position has now been taken by a rising power, China. Japan has already lost its place as the world's second largest economy to China. The rapidly aging and shrinking population are among the key factors which have contributed to Japan's economic malaise.
I think it's possible with a bit more changes in the attitudes in Japan, with a more flexible labor practice, with a bit more equal gender attitudes, things might start changing in the next 10 or 20 years.
Even as the Japanese government continues to grapple with its labor crisis and aging population, in rural towns like Nagoro, its residents will simply have to face the inevitable. They'll never be able to recover what they've lost. For them, time is not in their favor. And it may be too late to turn back the clock.
考えても仕方ないじゃないですか。先のこと考えてね。今こんな津波があったりしてすぐね、今こうして元気でも明日のことがわからん時代でしょう。そんなんやったら先のことね、暗いこと考えんと、自分は今楽しく明るくやっていくいうそんな考えのものですので。
もちろん若い衆が帰ってこんけんな。若い連中が帰ってきて何かをやろうっていう企業を起こせばいいんだけどな、そんなもんこともできるんだろうと思うけんね。やっぱりこれは今おる27名でな、これいろいろ話をしようて、まあこの集落をな維持するようなことをせないかんと思いますよ。
Economists tell me that while Japan's GDP growth hovers at 1% annually, that number is nothing to sniff at. Japan continues to grow despite a shrinking, aging population with fewer and fewer young people to replace itself. That speaks to the sheer productivity of the Japanese. Too soon for naysayers to write off Japan and say its cutting-edge era is over. After all, the country is known as the land of the rising sun. Just as sure as the sun rises every day, hope and resilience remains part of the Japanese DNA.